name's Stuart Cunningham. I'm one of the committee members on the BCS Chester and North Wales branch. It's very nice to see you all here this evening. We've got a brilliant talk lined up from our presenter, Stuart Ayres. And Stuart's got a huge backlog and wealth of experience in the field of education and educational technologies, both from a sort of teaching and pedagogy perspective, as well as from the perspective of training teachers and just generally trying to put into practice many of the laws and legislation that come down the pipeline from up on high, and putting it into practice in schools and in the classroom. So we've got a great talk ahead of us this evening. Interestingly, Stuart and I were just talking before we started tonight, and I think he was our last in-person speaker before the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown. And that particular talk was about, I suppose, a more general talk on the use of technology in education, and the sort of impacts that might cause and might create. And then, of course, we had this huge curveball out of nowhere, which was the pandemic. And suddenly technology became immediately incredibly important for everybody in all sorts of walks of life. So I think it's going to be a really interesting talk and something that we've probably all got a lot of resonance with over recent years. So without further ado, I will hand over to Stuart to give us his talk, and there'll be time for questions towards the end as well. So if you do have any questions, you can either post them into the chat and we'll pick those up towards the end, or if you want to wait until the end and then maybe give us one of the reactions, or virtually pop a hand up or something, you can come onto the microphone and ask a question if you prefer doing that. So yeah, I'll hand over to Stuart, and we will have some Q&A afterwards. Over to you, Stuart.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, for that, and for inviting me back again. It's 2 years since I was up with you last time, as we said, on the 11th of March 2020. Little did we know the extent of what was about to hit us. And it's interesting, really, that we're having this talk this way, because I guess this just presenting like this and being in this medium puts me in a reflective mood. And I'd like to start just a little bit by after introducing myself, by going back in time just a step to what we talked about, or what I presented, because I see tonight's talk as part of a bit of a continuum, looking back at what we've just been through and what the teaching profession has been through, and how educational technology impacted it. And so hopefully see my door. So yeah, my name is Stuart Ayres. I was taken on by my current company that I work for, Montague Place, which owns a handful of schools scattered around the world, as R&D director in 2020. And then all of a sudden I had a new bit added up to the end, director of online learning as well. And initially, that wasn't the intention. I wasn't going to be in charge of any online learning, because we weren't going to have any online learning. It was all about researching and developing ways of leveraging educational technology to best improve outcomes for our students. And that's a key interest of mine, educational technology, and the most effective deployment of it. So really happy with that job. And then on the 11th of March 2020, came to explain that to you lovely people up in Cheshire. And then on the 23rd, of course, of March, we went into lockdown, and my job changed instantly, as did everybody's. Did they not? And the interesting, just going back in time then, my original talk back in March 2020 was actually about the ways in which educational technology did not see, or rather technology generally did not seem to have impacted the teaching profession as much as it had other professions. And that was the drum I was beating at the time. Was I thought it was funny and a point of exploration to wonder why other professions had been more greatly impacted, if you like, by the progress of technology. And let's just have a look at some soldiers from the 1850s or thereabouts. And the reason I picked these pictures was the school I was working at before was built in 1859, when soldiers dressed like this would have been a common sight. And of course, teaching it now, it had changed in some ways, but not as many as many other walks of life had done. So here's the soldiers from the kind of 1850s. How about an operating theatre? An operating theatre from the 1850s, a rather unpleasant place to be for everybody. A factory, not from the 1850s, but from the kind of 1900s, a very different place to what we have now. And then a school, a bit like the one that I was working in just before I moved to where I am now. And I was thinking about the ways in which technology had impacted each of these realms, if you like, and the impact of technology and the pace of change has been immense, of course, over the intervening period. So soldiers don't dress like that anymore. They dress like this. They're practically cyborgs. They have armor and the ability to network with other their colleagues, so they can see where they are on the battlefield and get advanced information and use, as we're seeing right now, advanced technology to get an advanced view of the battlefield, not just from their own personal perspective, but from the air or from satellites, from aircraft, and to communicate with all those people. What about medicine? Has that changed? Well, yeah, obviously it's changed enormously, and most of the practices that we use now are phenomenally advanced compared to what they were in the 1850s. Our factories as well, much safer, cleaner places usually to work, more like this. But what about schools? What about the way that we teach and the environments that we use to teach it? Arguably, as far as I'm concerned anyway, one of the most important things society bestows upon any of its people is education. And we do it in an environment which doesn't actually look that much different from how it did in the 1850s. And it's always struck me as a bit of a surprise that I've taught for nearly 20 years and moved around environments that they would be familiar. I reckon that you get a teacher from 1850, 60 and stick them in that room right there, and they know what to do, right? They wouldn't have a lot to change. They pick up, okay, not chalk, but looks a bit like chalk, a pen, and they write on the board, which has, fair enough, changed colour from in the intervening period. But the environment is largely similar. Rooms with their name on, the name of the function of the room into which children gather, sit down, and are spoken to by somebody like me in a loud voice pacing about at the front, just like they did in 1850. So not much else has changed. And this is a really familiar environment for a very, very long time. And maybe that's because in all of the other environments that I've shared with you, and so many others besides, there's been an absolute need for change, an absolute pressing need to go through some kind of huge change. But teaching maybe just hasn't had that need necessarily. It hasn't been the requirement, the burning requirement to dramatically change the method of delivery or the way in which we get the point across. Teaching fundamentally comes down to the idea of explaining stuff, does it not? Explaining stuff to people in a way that they will be able to remember in the future. Training, maybe putting them through some kind of drill or repeated exercise while they take on board the information that the teacher is imparting. And I see it a bit like this, right? You've got a teacher who stands in front of some people. They've got some kind of model in their head. And if they're a good teacher, they have a very complete model of the thing that they're trying to explain. And it might be that model is built of many components, of layers of knowledge and information, all of which would have to be transferred in the correct order to be fully rebuilt in the minds of the students that the teacher is trying to convey the information to. And so here are those students, they're over here, right? And the object of our jobs as teachers, I suppose, is to, firstly, to have a very complete model of our area of expertise, but secondly, to transmit it in such a way as it can be reliably adopted by the people that you're teaching. And so that in many ways, their model is a lot like yours, if it's a good model. And then it's not just you that they take information from anymore, although it was much more a teacher's job just to convey the information in the 1850s. Now they get information from lots of different places, but nonetheless, that's the fundamental purpose: to build and understand and maintain a model that's much like the one that the teacher is trying to get across, I'd say. And the process, I suppose, can be kind of broken down into kind of three parts, right? And it works a bit like this, right? The model that you're trying to convey, it can be thought of as the content. So you've got content that explains and describes the model that you're hoping to teach. And you getting it across, the teacher uses various tools, methods to get that across, which we call delivery. So you deliver a lesson, you deliver aspects of your model to the students that hopefully are listening. And if they're not listening, they get shouted at, so then they do listen. Or you have some method of trying to get them engaged so that they're interested in what you've got to say. And then the object is to make sure, of course, conveying a model is one thing. Knowing that it has successfully made the journey, right, from your model, a very complete one, to the students is a whole different thing. And you have to go through a process of verification to ensure that the model that your students has got in their head is as much like yours as possible, if your model was a good one. And you want, ideally, what you really want from your students is to have a better model than you, I suppose, ultimately. In an ideal world, you want for society to take a little step forward every time they learn something. But in any case, we go through the process of verification by using assessment, by checking to see whether or not the students have understood you. And ultimately, of course, we do that by using exams or presentations. And before we get to the exams, we have lots of other methods of checking to see whether or not the students are successfully making the model that you're trying to convey in their heads and how closely it resembles the one that you're hoping to deliver. It's interesting to reflect, and as I did last time, we had a similar conversation about the way in which those three elements have changed over time. So just going through my little timeline here, let's break this back into those three elements: the content, the method of delivery, and the way in which you check, you verify the model has been successfully transmitted or transferred to your students' minds. And if you have a look at this little timeline here, I know I've probably missed out a lot of development, and I'm not seeking to make light of it at all, but I just want to sort of show this kind of transmission curve, if you like, from teachers in the 1850s, where the teachers really had complete models as far as their students were concerned in their heads. And they had other tools available to them. They had maps, they had books, they had some equipment to demonstrate things. But by and large, the information, the knowledge came from a person, a teacher, marching about at the front of the class and using rudimentary tools like the tablet there and chalk to illustrate ideas. And really, for a long time, that's really all you needed. If what you're trying to do as a teacher is to successfully transfer a complete and accurate, albeit complex model to the minds of your students, if you are just the world's best storyteller and you are phenomenally good at explaining things in such a way as you can conjure an image in the minds of your students which is perfect, then you probably don't need anything else. You are as good as a teacher can possibly get. If you're not, then you probably want lots of other, if you can't guarantee that your the complete model that you spent years making in your own head can be conjured in one go in the minds of your students, and you're probably going to need some other things like you to help you, especially as the models in our heads are complex and huge and composed of lots and lots of interrelated material which your brain spent ages collating as you sleep and read new things and come across new ideas. And so in the 1950s, of course, the delivery model, and before, obviously changed a little bit to have exercise books and the classroom, changed a little bit, I suppose. And then into the 1990s, we got some new materials or new content collections, I suppose, in the form of the World Wide Web and access to things like Wikipedia and online materials and collections, which we use then to transmit more and more information and to give us more options in the kind of model information that we had access to. And then on to the present day plus, you can see my little depiction here. I've got an Amazon Echo thing that you can ask questions to. Isn't that amazing that you can walk into a room and ask it a question and the room will reply? I think that's amazing. And we're starting to use these now and again in classrooms in the school I'm in now. Some of the prep school rooms have a little echo in, and occasionally the children will shout a question at the piece of equipment, and it will answer them, which is magic, isn't it? Think about it. And then we've got these other special content delivery systems like the one that's depicted here, Microsoft OneNote, which is effectively a huge notebook with absolutely no edges to the paper that you can put anything on, videos, text, writing. You can draw in real time to convey ideas directly to the notepads of your students, and you can have that on the board while you're talking. So our delivery, our content models have developed over time, and we've got access to more and more kinds of content and ways that we can place it in front of students. What about delivery? How has delivery methods changed? Well, delivery methods have changed from blackboards and chalk to having things which are a lot like blackboards and chalk as time has gone by. These really, the form factors have changed, but largely the method of delivery hasn't changed all that much, really. We had overhead projectors, and then we used presentations instead to project information onto walls that you had already prepared. And then we projected them onto, rather than just a blank wall, onto a posh blank wall that you could draw on as well. Interactive whiteboard in the 2000s at great expense, thousands of pounds for every classroom to have these pieces of equipment up. And then looking to the present day, possibly some other things, possibly some more sophisticated ways of delivering information to students in the form of glasses, 3D glasses, which not many people are using much. They're a little bit niche at the moment, but we'll come back to those later, because they certainly have a place in the future, I can imagine. And the better they get, the more content, and the better the content gets, the more we'll I imagine rely on them for presenting new models to our students. And what about assessment? So assessment then, checking the model is complete in your students' minds, hasn't changed an awful lot until just now, I would argue. It largely involves asking your students to repeat it and then checking that they were right. We've got so a textbook from the 1900s on the left-hand side looks a bit like a textbook from the present day, where there's annotation in different colours, but mostly the same. There was an attempt to introduce automated systems for optical marks recognition systems and things like that to speed up some of the assessment process for us. But largely, it hasn't changed a lot. And when you think about it, assessment is actually really important. If in the process of transferring the model from my head to yours, something doesn't work out, and obviously students are all of us are constructing the model of the world based on the other things we already know. And so there's every chance that during the delivery at some stage, you might build up a misunderstanding as a student, and you might have an incorrect model, if you like, or a model that differs enough from what you hope the students learn for it not to be very useful, or for them to build on it later in ways that really don't work out. And you want to catch that moment. You want to catch the incorrectness as quickly as you can, and then correct it. That's really what we're trying to do. And so the speed of assessment is really important. The fastest you can uncover the misunderstanding and then put it right, the quicker the student's model will build, because they'll have a better model underlying the improvements that they're going to learn on top of, if you like. And to the present day, I'm going to come back to this system that you can see that little dashboard there a bit later on, because this is something that we started to use heavily during the lockdowns. There's a system called Sentry, and I'll come back to that in a minute. It's extremely clever and speeds that feedback process up an awful lot. Okay, so we got those three areas: content, delivery, and assessment, all of which have changed a little bit, but really not an awful lot. And really, the whole system have. And last time I was with you, we kind of thought about this: the fact that the media, the stuff we have to hand you and show you, has changed a little bit. It is evolving. The methods, though, where you go into a room with the function written on the door, and they all sit down, and lots of students sit down, and then a teacher who's a specialist in that area starts talking, really hasn't evolved much at all, actually. It's largely the same. Like I said, if you look at the classroom in the 1850s and a classroom that I can go in today, I reckon they'd be familiar to a teacher from the 1850s. I don't think they'd have to have an awful lot of adjustment to make in their head before they can start working again. And last time we spoke, we talked about why that might be, and I suggested that there are some significant barriers to change in teaching, in the teaching profession, and part of it is because we work in a very target-driven environment, don't we? It's all about targets, and you don't want to mess with it because you haven't got long to do so. So you can't introduce big sweeping changes, and you can't experiment with stuff and see how it pans out because you haven't got long to do so, and you're interfering with children's education, and you don't want to mess that up because it's really important. So it's really important for every child that their education goes well and that they come out of it with a fantastic experience and a really good model, and they go into the world as a confident, learner, able to carry on. So they won't really appreciate it much if you spend a couple of years trying out a really a dodgy method of delivery which doesn't pan out. So there's a certain amount of resistance to change just on the basis that you don't have long and that your targets have to be good, not just because you, as a teacher you've judged them, but because you're driven by what one hopes is a good instinct to do the best by your children. And then the second thing is that it's a tight delivery model as well. It's annual, so you've got a year between cycles to get a lot right. And like I said, that doesn't give you an awful lot of time to adjust your approach. So it has to be a gradual improvement over a long time, adding little bits, but you don't have long to do so. The infrastructure itself is extremely rigid. You can't knock schools down and rebuild them just because you had a better idea of how you might want to assemble your program of learning for your students. Schools are big and expensive buildings, and they're subject to all the same things: the delivery model, the target-driven resistance to change, and the expense of making any changes to them as well, which to a certain extent. While the model of education back in the 1850s defined the way that we built our schools, now our schools also work the other way around and also partly define the way that we use them, the way that we go about teaching. We divide knowledge into functional areas, and we teach according to those functional areas. And on the rooms that we invite the children into, we write the name of the functional area on the door, and then the students come in and they sit down and they know what the room is for. And then in that room, they do that thing. And then when they finish doing that thing for that hour, they get up, they walk out, and they think about something completely different in a different room with its name on instead. So they have to make a big adjustment, and we interrupt them every hour while we move them about to think about something else. And I think it's interesting that those barriers to change have been in place. And of course, they've been largely unbroken, unchallenged for a long time. There has been interruptions, there's been wars, there have been other pandemics, but they haven't made a big change to the way in which we do stuff. Partly because the technological opportunities weren't really there for that to happen. And so if you imagine my little timeline here, I've got 1850 to kind of 2019. Is largely a very similar method of doing education, of teaching, in which you had a big building into which all your teachers and your children went in every day into those rooms with their names marked on them, and then they taught them, and then they went home and did homework and stuff. And then the next day, and then what happened? Well, we all know that just after I saw you first time, a great deal happened, and it completely shattered any chance of carrying on with the previous delivery models, because we weren't going to be allowed into those buildings, and we weren't going to be able to sit that closely together anymore. And so a lot of things changed very, very quickly. Okay, what I meant was all these issues, all these barriers to change were suddenly kind of null and void, right? The resistance to change went out the window. We didn't have a choice. The change came upon us before we had a chance to react almost. The adjustment from a very traditional teaching method and model to teaching online happened immediately, instantly, overnight, with very little warning. The school that I was at before, we clocked that it was coming probably about 2 weeks before it did, and rushed to get everyone ready for online learning. Luckily, we had a lot of the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that is, already in place. And luckily, the place where I went to was not far from being able to do this as well, we had to work very hard over a couple of weeks to make sure that it happened immediately. The original infrastructure was no longer there. Like it stood, but we couldn't go to it. So that was gone as well. No more rigid infrastructure. And all of a sudden, all these tools appeared out of nowhere, and they were free. So rather than being very expensive, and you had to kind of bid for them and wait for budgetary approval and people to help you install things, all that went out of the window. You were at home, and Google Classroom was up and running, and you had to pay for it. And Zoom was free, and all these resources just turned up as companies when we're going to have to do something. We're all going to have to pitch in because we don't know how long this will go on for. So the barriers to change were suddenly and abruptly and catastrophically, I suppose in many ways, just blown away, and they weren't there anymore. The only one that I suggest might have still remained was also under challenge, and that was the annual delivery model, where we still had to deliver something at the end of the year for students, but by and large, even that was going to change because of the impact of the rest of the changes on the children at the school. If you look at the Google Analytics of the time for people looking up things like Google Classroom, so teachers and students trying to make this instant adjustment, you get this kind of interesting graph. So this is, you can see it on the bottom. I just had a look earlier at the Google Analytics for searches for Google Classroom, for Zoom, for Microsoft Teams, for these digital delivery models like the one that we're using right now, where we all have a meeting. And the interest rocketed over March. You can see there's a certain amount of interest. So this scale, you can see, goes from kind of 0 to 100. And it's Google's arbitrary measure of how many searches were taking place on any day and week. And those little dips in the middle that you can see, they're weekends, right? So you see people weren't really all that fussed about Google Classroom on the weekends at all from January 2020. They'll actually switch off the idea of worrying about Google Classroom. But then in March, April 2020, they were pretty interested actually on the weekends in Google Classroom and how to get it up and running because they really wanted to get it going. Same goes for Zoom, of course. Zoom, as you probably remember, the share price of Zoom absolutely rocketed, and everybody. I don't know if any of you remember hearing Zoom, the word Zoom, in February 2020. I don't. I didn't know Zoom existed. In March, I did. I knew how to use it and deliver content through it. And same went with Google Classroom. My own school were operational with Google Classroom in a week flat. We prepared a whole load of materials to train teachers very, very quickly. And in the Easter holidays, we just went bananas, getting everything ready for when the students came back into their virtual classrooms. And we carried on delivering as if nothing had happened except for everything. so the model continued. The classes were live, but we were like I am to you on the other end of a camera, delivering our models just as we did before. Google Classroom usage rocketed. It increased. It doubled from about 75 million users to 150 million users, and that happened really, really fast. That they just suddenly had double the number of users trying to use all their systems. So the first few days were interesting. And I think that goes for a lot of other teaching systems like this as well, where they were suddenly overwhelmed by demand and had to suddenly acquire servers and build up delivery capacity to accommodate the millions of people that just joined their services. Can you imagine having to go from having to service, going from about 70 odd million users to 150 million users in about 3 weeks? It really had a phenomenal demand placed upon them to have to meet all this demand. Okay, so before all this, there had been schools online. They had existed. Not many, but there were schools that were only online. You couldn't really go to. the university, as you know, Open University, I pioneered this delivery model where you didn't go there, you got sent stuff. But the online environment opened up new opportunities, and it had been populated. Into High, famously, a little startup not far from where I am in South Wales, up in Crickhowell, started up in the 90s, a little online school with less than 100 students, all online. Suddenly became a feature, and has recently been bought and is now King's Into High, and is a much larger international operation. And all of a sudden, from 2019, where there were a handful, really a handful, a few schools online, all these other ones just appeared all of a sudden. I don't know where everybody was online. The Oak Academy was a kind of a startup that suddenly gained some government backing to develop lessons that anyone can access for free, that you can join. You can set your classes up as a teacher, and you can get all the content that you can deliver online for your students. How Online launched around the same time. EdTech was interesting because EdTech wasn't actually principally targeting the traditional lessons, really. They weren't trying to teach you physics and maths and chemistry. They were trying to teach you soft skills at this time as well. So that they produced this system which would help students still maintain their ability to discuss, to debate, and to attend interviews and things without losing those skills, whilst they weren't allowed to go near each other, share the same spaces as each other. And Pearson, who had been developing content for Sunline for some time beforehand, were suddenly properly online as well. And then thousands of other schools had to try and deliver something online somehow to their students that were waiting to be taught, and weren't allowed out, were we? We look back, we weren't even allowed outside for very long. So this, all of a sudden, all these online opportunities, the opportunity had already existed, but the burning reason to adopt them hadn't been there, and it was. So this space was rapidly populated, and all these are still there, so they haven't gone away. So you might have expected a kind of dip. We all like to return, don't we, to more comfortable ways of doing things that we prefer from before. But this one, I postulate, is different. But whilst many of us will go back to more traditional teaching methods, I can see it in staff that I work with. That many of them, didn't really like teaching online and would rather it never happens again. But then some of them, it's made a really big difference to the way they teach, and they're never going back to just the way they were. And that's really what the next part is all about. So what did it look like? So I'm a teacher. I teach every day. It looked like this. It looked like me with some students. I've got my iPad. I've got some lessons. In this picture, I've actually got my kind of pre April or May haircut. Remember how? And we all grew a bit more hair over the coming weeks. This is just before all that. And I was teaching in a way that I could get the point across to my students with my iPad there, and I could draw all over it, and I could. Actually, I've got a classroom on the left-hand side. You see a classroom with students, and I was giving them a little bit of feedback. And I had my laptop, and I went into my study, and I sat down, and I looked them in the not in the eye, but in the camera. Asked them to turn their cameras on, and then spoke. What I found was that it took a lot more energy to. Teaching is an energetic thing to do. You're performing, aren't you? You're delivering content to students, and you have to try and keep them engaged and be as exciting as you can be when you're teaching them binary arithmetic or something. But you move about. I do anyway. I move about at a pace. I need my space, and I want to draw things and show them things and use my hands. And this wasn't the same environment. There was no pacing. The room was very small. I did use my hands, but I could draw, I did find that in order to maintain levels of engagement, I had to up the energy level somewhat, because you don't come across in the same way over a camera as you do when you're in person. So it took a lot more energy and it took a lot of imagination, and we all had to think of new things to do. So in my classes, I was teaching some Key Stage 3 students, some Year 8s, some Year 6s even, and we would make virtual sports days using Scratch, for example, or we would use some of the new tools that came along, which I'll talk about in a moment, to devise fun, interactive ways of doing things, because the students, had a real choice here. They could not come. They could not turn up. They could blame the technology and stuff, and then you couldn't do much about it. You couldn't go and get them. You could contact home and say, I didn't see so and so in my class today, but you didn't have the same level of power, for want of a better word, over the control of the environment as you have in a physical one. So you had to make it. You had to make that kind of level of control by having lots of variety and providing lots of opportunities, novel ways for students to interact with you. And I found that they adapted incredibly quickly. I found that students that I didn't hear much from were suddenly had a voice and were contributing in a way that I hadn't expected. And sometimes you find that students would be quiet, they're really, really quiet, and you think, oh, I hope that person's all right. And then they'd turn in something which blew your mind. It's so much better than what they might have done in a traditional learning environment, because they'd had time to think about it and to get their thoughts and their stuff together to present it to you. And they just needed more time than they normally would have got. In the hour, at the end of the hour in the classroom, we would have gone, right, that's it, fine. And they go off and do something else. But in this environment, sometimes they had enough time to really really assemble something they were very, very proud of. So I saw a new side to different students during this. Some of them did not cope well, of course. They really struggled with it, and especially in the kind of social aspects, which I wager we'll be dealing with for some time. And we developed tools to help them too. So we had some pastoral stuff to help them out, some suggestions, some websites, and we tried to make the environment, the online teaching environment, as interpersonal as possible. And so I used a lot of breakout rooms and group work, and had them working together. And it didn't matter where they were, they could succeed in doing that. And it went on, didn't it? That's the other thing. I think if it had been a month or two, that would have been one thing. You would have got a crack and thought, well, that's very interesting. Phew, glad that's over. But it didn't. It wasn't over quickly. It carried on. And we went back to school on and off in September, October, November. And there were some lockdowns, of course. And I just want to show you a very, very brief video of what it looked like in almost like a kind of hybrid model, where this is a maths teacher in my school. And he's teaching with, you can see his classroom. I like this because you see that he's got a call open, and he's got the students are in it, and they've mostly got their cameras on, so they can't look at it. You can see them. And just take a look at this. iPad on a stand, homemade. And then Chris is drawing on the board. And students can see that, right? The iPad is a camera, and he can see them. And if the students, I'll just let him finish making his point. It's only 30 seconds, don't worry. It's not the whole maths lesson. So what's interesting about that is the way that he's looking at his students in the eye. He put his iPad on a stand that he'd borrowed from the chemistry lab, so that it was in his kind of eye line, and he put his laptop down on the desk. And if the students raised a hand or said something, he could hear it. And he would go, pardon? And answer their question, or draw something on the board. So he was trying to replicate as much as he could his classroom, the space that he was used to being in. And he's on his feet, like he likes to be. And he's looking at students in the eye. And so interesting that he developed it like that. And we started to use tools which we had available, we just hadn't had to use them much. So Zoom had been around for a while. I just never heard of it. Google Meet. These are video tools like the ones that we're using now, and they rapidly acquired new features. Google Meet didn't have breakout rooms for a little bit when we first started using it, or polls or voting, but they did very quickly after we got into it. Teams was suddenly very well integrated into the Microsoft Office 365 suite using OneNote and stuff. So that all of a sudden was a fully fledged offering. We use collaborative documentation, things like Google Keep. We had students working on the same document together, which they could do before. They just hadn't had the means to necessarily, or the requirement to. We used lots of interactive whiteboards, Google Jamboard, which is brilliant, Microsoft OneNote, which is brilliant, and we had students collaborating on their Jamboards, on our Jamboards, importing material, scribbling together, presenting to each other, to try and have them speaking to each other. We use breakout rooms and polls, which, like I said, turned up all of a sudden. Google Meet to my huge relief mid-year, as I was wishing I had them. We use games. I mean, we do use games anyway. Teachers, you do use games, but we had access to other ones, things like Quizlet, which I'd used for a while, was now an absolute staple. And then things like Blooket, which in my school is an absolute craze at the moment. These are the gamification of flashcards, effectively, is what these games are, and they allow students to compete with each other, which they absolutely love, either in groups or as individuals, whilst they're consolidating some of your tasks in a fun kind of way that they probably don't dwell on very deeply, but it does help you to develop some ideas that you can talk about, during the course of your teaching. And then came some much bigger guns, things like Sentry, where AI has started to be a useful thing. Sentry, for me, is kind of amazing. I was talking about the importance of the speed of feedback. And one thing that I think is important in teaching, in assessment, is, as I said earlier, addressing misunderstandings as fast as you can. And because of the way that we learn, you don't only address small misunderstandings rapidly. You can address large misunderstandings over a longer period of time. So what's really helpful is if you have several different frequencies of feedback, which increase in depth, I think. So if you have longer cycles of feedback where you spend more time with the student, speaking to them about effectively their model, their understanding, based on assessments that you give them, tests, presentations they do for you, things like that. You're basically asking them to explain aspects of their model that you're building up with them. But you can have AI-assisted tools like Sentry address much shorter cycles, much shorter frequencies of feedback by giving students feedback very quickly on things that they've got wrong. And one thing that Sentry does, which is very clever, is it sets students a diagnostic at the start of a course, and they basically form a core for maths, English, and sciences. And then it assesses their kind of level of understanding now. The artificial intelligence does. It's got lots of layers of AI decision making to do. And so it recommends a path, a group of lessons for them to do. And then as the students do those and then feedback and answer questions, it adjusts its model of what it thinks you should set them next. So using artificial intelligence, very quickly, if you've got a class of children, very quickly they're all learning slightly different things, because some of them it's taking them back to previous things it realizes that they didn't understand, to underlying concepts that it wants them to understand, where it takes them back into what you thought you set them. And other students, it's recommending harder things for them because they understood it all already. So very quickly, these AI-assisted tools that we're getting are going to help do a lot of the differentiation work for high-frequency feedback for us, and they're going to provide us, as Sentry does, with a whole load of diagnostic data for us to understand where our students are still going wrong. You can see Google are releasing practice sets, Google practice sets. If you Google practice sets, you'll see an interesting product which is just about to hit Google Classrooms, which is a lot which is very similar. So if I set an assessment to students, ask them some questions, I can bring in material from the web, videos or pieces of prose or writing or other examples from elsewhere. Ask them questions on it, and it will bring in information from other places to help address their misunderstandings in an AI-driven way, which will help students to fill in gaps that you can't be there for. It might not be absolutely perfect, but look, it's better than nothing. And well, usually it's better than nothing. But these systems in that century are very, very well crafted. So by and large, they are a lot better than nothing. They're truly beneficial. So we had all these new tools. So the title of this talk was, did it all just grow up then? So we had a lot of these tools around already, but did it all come together? Did educational technology meet its need when we needed it? And is it growing up now? So are we ever going back to what we were before, where we had a hodgepodge of different tools which we didn't really use that much, but we were there? Well, I think that the way it'll break down is a bit like this. I think that you'll have kind of if you've got this traditional delivery model powering on, you'll have a baseline of ways that we've done things for a while that won't have been impacted as much as you might have expected. Actually, I think a lot of education will fall back into more comfortable traditional ways of delivery, but may retain some of the lessons and tools that we used and got used to. But by and large, it will shed a lot of them, but we'll keep a percentage. But something else will happen, and that's that the online environment which suddenly appeared is not going away. So I think that online schools, as we looked at earlier, will increase in dominance and familiarity, and I think that in many cases that they will grow, and you'll get schools which are only online and students attend them. Not necessarily exclusively. So some of these online schools will be the only place that a lot of people go. And some of these are obviously they're colleges, and it's not just school, but education generally will be all entirely online. I think what's going to grow at least as fast is this kind of something in between the two, a kind of hybrid model, where there's a great deal of online material use and technology, but then there's the face-to-face stuff too. And I think that for a lot of students, they are already used to, and will become increasingly used to, blending their delivery, where they get their information from. And I think that tutors and online tutorial, a lot of it will go online. It has done already, and that students may get services from different places. So you can already kind of see that happening, where some students are, they go to school, but they get a lot of money from school, but rather than just going to a tutor, they may also get information from online, just like they do if they use a language app to learn a language like Spanish or French or something. But they're using more and more online resources to augment, to add to their experience. And I would argue that I would be at all surprised if in the future students actually select different modules from different places for different things that they're learning, based on where they think they can get a better deal or lesson from. And it's likely to be that students attend this school for their physics lessons, where there's a really good teacher, a great course, and this school for their maths ones, because there's a better deal to be had there. And I think education will work that way. It'll stray and develop into this kind of hybrid future where the traditional model still exists, but is less dominant and less important as online and hybrid models develop and get better based on technology, which is coming out now. I've talked a lot, and your ears are probably hot. Coming to the end of what I wanted to talk to you about now. But back in 2020, in May 2020, the 19th, a few weeks after the March presentation I'd done first for BCS. And I kind of redid it, and I was thinking about what we just started on. And I made the observation that we're going to be 2035 will feature lots of AI assisted marking, where the teacher is helped in a lot of this by getting diagnostic feedback from AI systems, which will also choose interventions to put in place if they spot there's a requirement for it, and explain to the teacher what they've done afterwards. And AI will become much more important in class. This is what I told everyone in 2020. I also suggested that XR, where X is a variable, and so you're talking virtual reality, augmented reality, will grow in importance as they get better. And let's face it, the content at the moment for most of those things is not amazing, and it's not helped by virtual reality rigs often make you feel sick. So they're not much use for classrooms just yet. They're very expensive. The content's not amazing, but they will be. They will be very important soon. Remote tutoring, virtual classrooms, I postulated in 2020 might become important. And then I did say that remote schooling would be a feature of growing importance back in May 2020. Well, it was obviously from May 2020 that would be the case, but now it's not going away, and I would suggest that it's going to only increase in performance, and that AI-assisted teaching and learning systems will be developed that aren't here yet, like what's happening with Google, the Google Classroom, and their use of things like practice sets. And in my opinion, Google practice sets are a first step in exactly this direction, where they start to deploy AI as an industrial bolt-on to the education system. So AI is there helping helping people to learn by understanding how learning takes place. Okay, so what do I think now? So final few minutes, I've updated the 2035 vision to be slightly different, divided into those three areas that I told you about earlier: content, delivery, and assessment. So what about content? Well, virtual models are going to become more and more important. And by what I mean by that, I mean two things. I mean, virtual models like a model of a boat, a model of a house, a model of a thing, an object that you go and look at, will become more and more important, including models of places and spaces that you can't visit, like the inside of a cell, or the surface of Mars, or a supernova or something. And I also mean models as in as conceptual models, like virtual models of fusion or psychological theories. So I think the virtual models will become more available, better quality by a mile, because the delivery systems for them are about to hit the shops, basically. By the end of this year, I think that we will see some virtual reality kit, which actually drives the content process forward. 3D printing, I actually think is I thought it was a bit of a fad. Now I don't. I think that actually, if you think about all these people working in their respective environments, I think that collaborative work between classrooms in different parts of the world and students in different parts of the world will become more important, and you'll get the requirement for people to want to be able to work on the same thing physically as well as notionally, including holding objects in their hands that they wouldn't be able to get hold of otherwise. So students holding archaeological items in their hands, which they can't go and get because they're because there aren't any of them, or because they're extremely rare and valuable. But 3D printing means that they can, and as the materials and the costs and the recycling concerns diminish, as the materials get better, I think that it'll just be commonplace for you to print something out to work and possibly recycle it afterwards. And video, the quality of video, not just made by people, but also made by AI systems, understanding what they're supposed to be trying to produce, I think will become more and more important. All these feeding this XR delivery systems, these virtual and augmented reality systems, which I propose will be much more mainstream very soon than they are now. That and the requirement of systems like Classroom to be able to cope with people's accessibility needs, to be able to adjust the way that they look at, and see, and hear, and feel, and experience information delivered by teachers in the way that suits them best. And you can already see this happening in things like Microsoft OneNote, where they allow you to adjust every aspect of the color combination of the notes and information that you see. And teachers can feedback by just recording their voice directly onto a notebook that the students are working on, even as they are working on it in real time. And then live performance as well, live performances, live feeds, fed directly to students. So what if a student cannot get to a laboratory to watch an experiment, but they can have somebody do it with them and show them around, with whom they can react in real time and ask them to ask them questions, show that again, what did you just do, that kind of thing. And then finally, the AI-assisted feedback loop closing, and with different levels of feedback given with different frequencies to sharpen up and perfect the student's model faster with multi-frequency feedback. And finally, in the same way that you currently have Apple Health on if you've got an Apple Watch and stuff on a phone, you probably now and again tap on the Health app and have a look at your vital statistics and see how slow your heart rate when you make stuff like that. Well, the same thing is going to happen with learning. You will have learning apps which will tell you how you're doing and which will allow you to adjust your progress yourself, fed by these multi-frequency feedback systems, which allow you to understand where you're going wrong and adjust it very quickly, so you learn much more quickly. So I think that the 2035 model has just taken a big leap forward, actually, from where I thought it would get to, certainly in March 2020, and definitely by May. I think that a lot of the changes that we've seen over the last couple of years are here to stay, and that the systems have taken a huge leap forward, and that a lot of students are getting a lot of them, and I've now become normalised. So a lot of the students in our care won't ever go back to just a traditional method of collecting information. It's already changed, and that's where I believe that we've got to, and that's where I think that we are going. And that concludes with 20 seconds ago my talk. And I guess it's time for me to stop talking and to give your ears a rest. But I wonder if, having asked all that, if you have any questions.
Fantastic. That was great. Thank you very much, Stuart. Yeah, really interesting, fascinating insight into the experiences and the world of what's been going on in education for the last couple of years. Yeah, great. We do have a couple of questions and comments in the chat, so let me just kind of wind back through them and I'll relay them to you quickly. So I think the first one was about a particular slide that you'd showed actually fairly early on. I think we're probably slide 4 or 5, which effectively the overriding kind of impetus of that slide, I think, was the notion of kind of the classical idea of telling kids what they need to know and then them telling you it back to make sure that they know it. So the kind of, I suppose in a crude way, if I was to say it, the regurgitation of knowledge. So the sort of question on that was essentially, how do you also sort of cover or think about the getting the kids to teaching them how to think, how to reason, how to make critical decisions and so on. How does that kind of work in that very digitally dominated space?
It's still the same. I had this conversation with a colleague earlier. We were debating the same idea. When we talk about models, we're not just talking about models we're talking conceptually as well, right? So you still teach, a lot of the ways in which we teach. I'm not only in computer science. I teach computer science. I'm not only describing the way that a CPU works or anything. I'm also asking them to critically think about the impact of technology on society and the way in which, like we're doing now, the way in which society might change. And we use because we do IB in my school, so we teach theory of knowledge and CAS and all those things. We just use different mediums and tools to do so. So I did refer to models a lot. I guess I may give everyone the impression that I was only talking about, almost like describing stuff that I want my students to tell me back. It's not just that, though. You convey conceptual models, such as the way that one thinks, one learns, in the same way, and much of a teacher's job works that way. If I'm preparing students for university and for interviews and stuff, we'll practice those things, and you can do those virtually in the same way that you do. And of course, everything had to adapt, so we certainly do.
Fantastic, thanks, Stuart. I think Patrick had asked that question, and there was another question you had as well, Patrick. So I'll pass over to if you want to ask directly.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you very much. Yes, I was thinking about what you're saying, Stuart. Yes, that is about the this notion of where you almost you have students picking services from here, from there, and that sort of thing. And it got me to thinking about it's essentially as what a lot of people might call a free market model. So you're sort of almost democratizing the market there. But the concern that I had, and I'll just add here that so my background is 10 years in EdTech myself. So I've been in schools for a long time. I was by the end I was network manager. Boo, hiss, don't like network managers. But I was a different kind of network manager. I was in the school choir. I did language leaders. I took the lads in who weren't who were trying to find ways of getting into my system, and I showed them how to behave, giving them their own thing and that sort of thing. So I've got a strong link with this, and I worked with a great many very, very good teachers, and particularly also pastoral leads. And what I think about this sort of thing, I think about that. I'm afraid to say they were mainly lads at the end. In fact, they were all lads. That relationship that you build up with those kids, and of course, it's not just in terms of IT. I've seen some amazing form tutors get, I was going to say confessions, and I mean disclosures of, really horrible things, intrafamilial abuse and all that kind of thing, and that interpersonal relationship that is built up. This takes a long time. It takes trust, it takes knowing them, and it takes being with them. And as you said, it's not going, that's not necessarily going away. But I look at it from the point of view of our primary focus here in BCS as technologists. And I think, is this what we want to encourage? Do we want to be pushing for this free market style model of where people are getting services from different areas? Because what you don't have then is the pastoral element and that sort of thing that comes along. You also don't have, I will shut up in a minute, you also don't have I hate it now that everyone's using managed service providers, because the relationships that I built up with those young men who, I better finish the sentence quickly now, who were at risk of going off the rails. They would only listen to another technologist, somebody who knew more than they did. And I was exactly the same myself 20 years ago. That's how I know. Those things are done because you are staff. You are not going to get that service from a managed service provider. And conversely, you're also not going to get the same experience if the kid is going and getting lessons from here, in this, from there, in that. I am very concerned actually at the moment as to the direction we seem to be going down in schools, where actual technologists, IT professionals, which is not to say teachers who are good at computer science, it's to say IT people who've chosen to work in education, are basically being pushed out. And that element is no longer really going to be present in the next 10 to 20 years because everyone's gone to the cloud. But then those lads aren't going to have someone to take them under their wing, show them how to do things properly, someone they will respect. And when I listen to all of these things that I hear people saying, and as you said tonight, what I think is, I don't know where this is going. That element's going to go.
I would hope to comfort you by saying this. I think that even if you imagine the most extreme version of what I described, and let's face it, it's a vision, or rather a vision in the sense that I'm not saying it's something that I hope comes true. It's where I see it all going. I imagine a future in which there is at least a possibility. Not everyone will use it. Where you might select services from different places based on who you think best provide them. And human beings are very good at those services. Will be environments. There'll be places in which content is placed, delivery is done, and assessment and feedback takes place. And I don't think that I think that they will be assisted by AI and stuff, but they will still be done by people. Education needs that. The relationship with your students is a really important thing. And I think that humans are very good at making sure that environments for relationships, to work do take place. And I think that educational environments will always be sensitive to the requirement for that. So I don't think that I'm not really worried that we'll lose the ability to form relationships with students that are working with us. And I didn't really find that even online, even during the pandemic. We were, every one of our lessons were live. We never had, we had aspects where I would say, okay, listen, you guys go and do that now, and then we'll come back together, of course. And I do that in a real classroom. So what was the difference? What we did? But the thing that I was delivering was this particular aspect of work and knowledge, and then the students still maintain their relationship with me. I was largely pastoral in my previous role. I was pastoral deputy head actually, and so I get the depth of importance for students to be allowed to form healthy relationships with the people that are charged with their care. And I don't think that educational environments will forget that. I think it won't work unless they do. So I think that they will somehow build it into the framework of how a delivery model works. And yet, to a certain extent, you can see that in things like E2X actually, where that's their first concern, not their second concern. It's actually the kind of pastoral aspect. So I think that whilst the fledgling versions of systems like the ones we're using haven't had that aspect in them, because they were required overnight, instantly, immediate requirement for Google Classroom to work as a room. I think that schools will develop pastoral aspects, and I think that you can already see it happening. So I hope, Patrick, that makes you feel a little better. And I think it will happen, because I don't think the profession will let it not.
It comes back to the hybrid model again as well, and I've got a few interesting stories to tell there that I would like to talk to you about, but of course that may divert us from the course. So if anyone else has any other questions, but I would appreciate speaking to you separately.
Okay, well let's arrange that for some time. That'd be cool. I think one thing that strikes me about education going through thank you, I got that. About education going through this change, we're early days. We're early days in the whole development of systems like that resemble or that cover all the bases that a traditional education system made, and no system, not even the one that we were using, fitted everyone perfectly. And people were let down by traditional teaching environments and systems. So there's no guarantees some people won't be let down by anything we build next. But and I think you'll get good ones and less good ones. But I think that by and large, like I said, I think that by and large the profession will make the adjustment, and the best ones will, won't they? So the best environments where students are happier and are where they progress best, and therefore they're likely to be the ones that have thought that through.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. A great discussion, and yeah, maybe a good one to pick up offline afterwards. I'm really conscious of time. We're a little bit over our budget technically. So there's one final question, Stuart, which I think you can probably answer with a single figure if you so choose to do so. Which was essentially, there was a question from your experience: what would be the optimum number of learners partaking in an online session?
That's a really good question, there's if you'll forgive me, a 2-minute answer. If you seek to replicate what you've already got, then it's probably about the same. So in a classroom, it's lovely to have. You don't want 3. There's not enough vibe. You don't want 100 because you can't make a vibe. 100 students, unless you split the task in a different way. So, and that's why it's a 2-minute answer. So if we're just doing you, me, and a handful of people, I want to put in breakout rooms. Normal class size is great. If anything, it's slightly big actually. I guess that sort of 20 would be amazing. If you get 20 kids, that's a really nice vibe and manageable class size. If you can have it so that you can deliver a lot of information to a lot of people. If you've been to like a Brian Cox lecture or something like that, where you obviously he delivers a lesson to 7,000 people, and it's a really good lesson. You get everything, blimey, that's amazing. Well, that's okay, but he hasn't had a chance to check that your model, he successfully, that you understood him and stuff. So it might be that it is possible to deliver to a lot of students all at once, as long as you have ways of chunking down the feedback, the kind of feedback checking loop by using other people. And again, I'm not necessarily saying this is an awesome idea, but it's going to happen. It's already happening where you have in other parts of the world, especially super teachers, and then lots of tutors helping students grasp what they've just heard and seen. So optimal for one teacher, 20, I reckon. Optimal for a system depends on the system and how you make it and how well designed it is, I guess. And it could be a much larger number than 20.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great. So yeah, as I said, we will have to call time there. We're at our limit, and I guess people maybe want to get off and have food and do other things this evening. So again, just for me to thank Stuart for an excellent talk, really enjoyable. Thank you for coming along, talking to the branch this evening. As I said, we are the Chester North Wales BCS branch. You can find out all about the latest and upcoming talks via our events page online. So keep an eye on there, and keep an eye on your inboxes, where you'll also receive information on the latest things that are taking place. So that's it for this evening. Thank you all very much for coming along, and hope to see you again soon. Take care.